That is one big reason why unions are so important, because you're not alone. Hearing your stories, it was the union that kept you from fighting those battles alone. That's why everyone deserves that opportunity.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
This is going to be a Unions 101. We're not talking about any news today. We want, and this is a show, this is an episode that we do every now and then, maybe a couple times a year, because there is so little understanding of unions in this country, of how workers can come together and make their lives better, make their jobs better, make their life better for their families and their communities. I think that's possibly by design, but nevertheless, a lot of folks, they're going to come out of high school, they're not even going to be able to tell you what a union is, what it does. So we are going to get down to the basics. What is a union? How do I form one? Why are they good? What is a worker even? What is organizing? What do we mean by that? We're going to get to all of that and more, and that's all we're going to do on the show today, folks. 90 minutes of just what is unions? What is unions? That's all we're talking about today. We've, like I said in the intro, we have a fantastic panel assembled here today, and so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pass the mic. We're going to go around the horn, let everybody introduce themselves, tell us their name, their union, and why they're active in the labor movement. Why is it that because all of these folks, they have, maybe devoting their life to the labor movement, maybe a bit of an overstatement, but a good amount of all of these people, all of their time is taken up by advocating for their coworkers and for themselves on and off the job, and for other people. So we're going to go around the horn. Everybody's going to take a couple of minutes to introduce themselves. And while they do that, for our YouTube and Facebook audience, I am going to fix our frames. So we got a lot of people on the Zoom here, so I got to make sure everything looks nice. So let's start off with Lee Diaz.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lee Diaz. My full name is Leandra, but everybody calls me Lee. I go by she, her pronouns, and I'm a graduate worker at New York University. And I've been a worker with the Graduate Student Organizing Committee, which we abbreviate as GSOC, for almost 6 years now, since starting a PhD in American Studies. This is part of UAW Local 2110. I was recently a delegate to the UAW Constitutional Convention, and am part of Unite All Workers for Democracy, which is a reform caucus of the UAW. And in addition to that, I'm also, like I said, getting a PhD in American Studies, and I study how capital moves, but people don't. I got involved with the labor movement because I had a health scare 2 or 3 years ago. I knew when I got to grad school that I was going to be in a union. Like, I knew that they were good in theory, like it was good in my politics, but I never saw myself as an organizer or a leader in the labor movement until I got sick. And it became clear when I was trying to get healthcare for Crohn's disease, which is an autoimmune disease, that the only people who were sticking up for me were my union. It wasn't the university, it wasn't my employer. A lot of times my doctor's hands were tied, and it sure as hell wasn't the insurance company. And so when I got better, I realized that this was something that was super important, because even if I, as someone who's like highly credentialed, highly educated, basically getting a PhD in bureaucracy, had difficulty navigating the healthcare landscape and difficulty like engaging with my employer, then so many people must too. And so now I like organize full time. Yeah. So excited to be here.
Fantastic. And for longtime and critical listeners of the show, you will know that Lee Diaz has been on the program before. She is a return guest. We talked to her after the New York Union grad students went on strike a couple of years ago. So That was a good episode, and they were able to win. What was it? A 40% raise or something insane?
Yeah, over the course of the 15 years between 2015 and 2030, we'll have increased our hourly wage by 200%. And
Wild.
we went from $20 an hour to $26.50 in the first year of our contract.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. All right, so let's just go around the screen. Johnny.
Hi, I'm unmuted. Great. Hi, my name is Johnny Lane. I'm a Delta flight attendant. I've been a flight attendant for almost 15 years with Delta, so long career. I got started organizing our union at Delta after I had a really bad year. You all just know it's just one of those years where everything goes wrong. My car was stolen. We had a family emergency with my sister. She had a stillborn baby. And then my mom had a mild heart attack scare. It was just awful. So I did have some absences on my record, and those were it. And my manager called me in and was like, hey, what's up with your reliability? Well, we're going to have to put you on, some sort of, we call it probation, like being back on like a disciplinary action. I'm like, you know what? I had all these tragedies. Where's the compassion? Where's the gray area that people usually talk about? Well, our company talks about in terms of not having a union. The gray area is a benefit. They could be understanding. They could do you favors. And so in that moment, it seemed like none of that was happening. So I was like, okay, something is wrong here. Something isn't adding up. It's not matching with what they're telling me. And so then my friend, who some of you have met, Christina Simonin, she had started becoming more active with unionizing in the workplace. And she called me and was like, hey, Johnny, let's meet up. We had our first one-on-one, and it didn't take much to convince me to start organizing with her. So we've been organizing with AFA, Association of Flight Attendants, led by Sarah Nelson, for close to 6 years now. It's been a while, and that may seem like it's not successful, but for an airline our size, where our work group, we have close to 23,000 flight attendants. And so in order for us to even trigger a vote for a union, we have to get close to 11 to 12,000 flight attendants to sign authorization cards. It is a monumental task. And by the time we're done, it will be the largest organizing effort in modern labor history for one closed shop. So we're doing a big thing here, and it's taking a while, but we're getting there piece by piece. And we're inspired by so many of you who are organizing in the work that you're doing: Starbucks, Amazon, REI, just every day. So you're keeping us going. So we thank you for that inspiration and the hard work that you all are doing. And we're just glad to be a part of this movement. We're glad that you guys are welcoming us into the labor movement. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Couldn't be more happy to see anybody and everybody unionizing. So it's good to see that, and I'm glad to have you. Hayden.
I'm Hayden Wright. So I'm with the UMWA, which is United Mine Workers of America, and I'm associated with Locals 2245 and 2368 as the auxiliary president. We've actually been on strike for 18 months. So for us, it's a little bit different. We're not just doing new organizing, we're also fighting a huge fight against we've been on strike against. So a lot of the organizing we've been doing is actually bringing other parts of the labor movement and getting them involved in the strike action that's happening here with us. And we've seen huge turnouts and huge outreach from Sarah Nelson, from Liz Schuler, from the steelworkers that have come from all over the country to come down and show support. So just keeping the message out there when you have a big fight like that going on. And we're not looking at a tentative agreement right now. We're still on strike, and we could still use that support and solidarity. And you only gain that through a union. So it's us on strike here is 900, but we've had 6 million brothers and sisters that have had our back for 18 months. So that is one big reason why unions are so important, because you're not alone. Hearing your stories, it was the union that kept you from fighting those battles alone. that's why everyone deserves that opportunity. And I'm so excited to be here with all of you and to hear your stories.
Absolutely. Graham?
Hi. I can't even express how honored and excited I am to be here in the presence of such incredible organizers. I guess I'll introduce myself. I'm Graham. My pronouns are they, them. I work at REI in New York City. We recently unionized in March and are beginning our contract negotiations. So starting to get our first contract on paper. I'm part of the bargaining committee. So I'm actually sitting at the table with a group of my coworkers, hashing it out with our employer to get, fair wages, fair working conditions. And I became active in the labor movement just because I was seeing a lot of injustice and mistreatment of myself and my coworkers, especially coming back to work after the pandemic. People's safety was not being respected. Their general humanity wasn't being respected and continues to be disrespected. So yeah, I came for the workplace kind of organizing, but I'm staying for the amazing national effort that is happening right now. So yeah, it is a huge honor to be here, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being willing to take the time, Graham. And last but certainly not least, Michelle Eisen.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm going to echo what Graham said. To be in the presence of such strong, amazing organizers in this current labor movement climate in our country is really phenomenal. I'm a Starbucks barista here in Buffalo, New York. I started with the company in August of 2010, so just past my 12-year anniversary. And what brought me to Starbucks to begin with is I'm a production stage manager. I've been working in the local professional theater scene since college, but that doesn't come with health benefits. So I was looking for a part-time job that was flexible, that would allow me to have health benefits, and that was where Starbucks came in. That was their deal. That's who they professed to be. I'd been a longtime Starbucks customer, and I knew they had a reputation for how they treated their employees, and I knew how I was treated as a customer. So this seemed like a perfect fit. And I think the early part of my time with the company, they did live up to those professed values that they have. They say they're a progressive company and they care about their employees and the community and the environment. But then things started to slip, and it was a really clear shift in the company sort of policy when it came to what we're calling profits over partners. Starbucks calls their employees partners, it was coined because we're all given stock in the company. But it's since been used as a really manipulative term to make us think that those of us on the floors of these cafes, the hourly workers, are somehow have an equal stake or an equal say in the company as, upper management and corporate, which is just simply not the case. And I got involved in the organizing campaign here in Buffalo right at the beginning where it started, not because I knew what I was doing or I knew necessarily what was going to come of it, but because I had already made the decision in spring of 2021 to leave the company. We had worked through the bulk of the pandemic. We were not taken care of. A lot of what Graham is saying, I'm echoing. This is a multi-billion-dollar, multinational corporation, and they were simply not taking care of us at a time when they A, should have been, and B, absolutely could have been. On top of that, you had a company like Starbucks on all of these financial shows with the CEO boasting record-breaking profits in the middle of the pandemic. Not just regular profits, record-breaking profits. And we've got full-time workers in these shops that can't pay their rent or get groceries based on what this company is paying us. And on top of that, we're in the middle of a global pandemic where we're putting our lives and our families' lives at risk every single day. So I was going to be done. I was feeling incredibly undervalued. And then a couple months after I'd made the decision to sort of start leaving, the process of leaving the company, a coworker asked me what I thought about the potential of Starbucks unionizing. To which I said I had never thought about that. I didn't know a ton about it. My father and my grandfather were in unions growing up, and I knew that our health benefits were really great because of it. And I knew that it was generally a good thing, but I didn't know a lot about service industry unions. It's just not something you hear all that much about. It's a very notoriously difficult industry to unionize to begin with. I certainly didn't know much about coffee shop unions. There had been a local coffee shop here in Buffalo called Spot Coffee that had managed to unionize in the summer of 2019. And that kind of put the bug in everybody's ear that maybe, but then there was a pandemic. So those conversations came to a close. But all of a sudden here it was, and it sounded like the best option, not having to leave a company I'd invested over a decade of my life in and working from the inside out with my coworkers to ensure we have a bigger voice on the job and to improve our working conditions. And so I said yes, very naively and not at all knowing what that was going to entail. And very idealistically, assuming that the company would give us a little bit of pushback, but that ultimately they would be the company that they say they are and acknowledge that this is the right move and lead the industry like they do. And instead, a year later, we're still fighting for our lives. Now, my store was the first to unionize. We were successful and able to do that. And it has started a national movement for this campaign. As of yesterday, I think we have 235 unionized locations across the US, which encompasses just under, I believe, 6,000 baristas. But there are 400,000 approximately baristas, Starbucks baristas in the United States. So, we still are working really, really hard, but we're getting stronger every single day. And we are able to do this alongside all of these wonderful folks also organizing their workplaces and Amazon. And it's just a really fantastic, amazing climate to be a part of, because what Hayden said is it's the support of fellow unions. I mean, we were never doing this alone. This one little store in Buffalo that was able to do this back in December of 2021 did not get there alone. It would have been impossible for us to do that alone. So I never want to lose sight of that and continue to acknowledge it, because it's what's going to allow all of us here to keep fighting this fight.
Yeah, you mentioned that you've been working there over a decade, and that is a long time for, a service job, right? That's not common. And John Rocky in the chat mentioned that. And also wanted to shout out, we've got David Story in the chat. Appreciate that. He's co-founder of the show, and always love to see him continuing to engage. And so before we go to our first break, let's... before we even get into unions, what is a union? What does a union do? What is a worker? One of the things that I tried to do when I was thinking about the panel is I did try to get several different types of what we would call workers, right? And so we've got people, Hayden isn't, she hasn't actually been, she's not actually a coal miner, right? But she's very much, those are her people. We've got flight attendants, and grad workers and service workers. And so this is and we've got people who have negotiated contracts, people who've been on strike, people who are currently on strike, people organizing new unions who've been doing that so, a really wide and kind of representative swath of what's going on in labor in the country. And so because of the diversity of the jobs that we've got, I'm interested, Hayden, in what you would say to the question of what is a worker? Who are the people that can form unions? What is a worker?
Well, a worker is anyone that someone else is exploiting their labor for profit. So anyone, if you're producing income for someone else, you are a worker. So myself, I'm also a high school English teacher. I'm still part of the working class. I'm producing materials. I'm producing students to go out into the world and either be college or career ready. And I'm compensated that. I also have a boss that dictates certain things to me. So I think that we've had a big problem in the country the past several years of trying to divide working class people into white collar and blue collar work to make someone feel superior or to give the illusion of, oh, look how good you have it. You don't need to organize amongst yourselves. You don't need a union. That's only for the other section of people. And that's completely untrue. All workers will benefit from union representation.
That's that's why I asked you, because one of the things that people always say to people like Michelle or Graham or Lee is, oh, coal miners, they need unions, right? But grad students, baristas, retail workers, no, they don't need unions. They're not actually even workers, some people will say. And so officially, I think we've got a coal miner's wife coming on and saying that's nonsense. So we're never going to hear that again, is my expectation.
Yeah, I wanted to jump on, if it's possible, Jake, I wanted to jump in on this too, because I think there's this impression of the working class that is like distinctly a like 20th century idea of what the working class is, when a 21st century, a 2022 working class is made up of women and queer people and non-binary people. It's overwhelmingly made up of people of color. It's got sectors that are vastly distinct. Even within something like the United Auto Workers, I remember 2 years ago when we went on strike, we had our classic, UAW on strike placards, and tourists, NYU butts up against Washington Square Park. And so tourists will come by and be like, the auto workers, who are they here in solidarity with? And we as graduate students, shared that there are these white collar sectors, technical, office, and professional. It's not just grad workers, but legal aid. There's a vast growing number of legal aid and attorneys in the UAW. And which is, I would never say, like, I know for the folks on the line, like, as I've learned more about the history of the auto workers and the men and women who work in the plants, I'm never going to be at risk of bodily harm in like losing a finger at my job. But at the same time, as Hayden has so concisely and precisely articulated, like, I love that definition of like people who don't have control over their time and energy and output because they need to work for wages to live. And sometimes those wages are really high, right? But the end, I think about auto workers who are skilled technicians, underwater welders, longshoremen, and you might hear something like their salary and draw a distinction, which is ultimately arbitrary because they're not property owners and they're not people who earn wealth from the labor of other people. Like, that's what makes up the working class.
Right. Yeah. Does your money, to the extent that you have it, come from your money, or does it come from your labor, the sweat of your brow, or the sweat of your brain, so to speak? Right. That's definitely the important dividing line. And there was somebody, I think maybe Zach Patton on Twitter, mentioned that yeah, I'm a longshore worker. I make like $150,000 a year, and I'm damn proud of it. And I don't make too much. You make too little, right? And look at how much the longshore bosses are making, right? And that's definitely the important dividing line there. And so let's get one more question out of the way, and then we'll go to our first break. So we've got a working definition of workers, which is important because I'm in a union environment where I'm white collar, right? I work on the computer all day. I sit in my cube and I work on the computer. And I have a lot of coworkers that they do not conceive of themselves as workers. They conceive of themselves as professionals. And all of these, maybe there are interesting conversations that we can have about the divisions in the working class and what that does to people. But the important thing is to understand that we are working class. And so with that working definition, what is a union then? And for that, I'm interested, Michelle. I'll let you take that away.
So a union is a collective of workers that are able to use that as their voice when it comes up to people like, let's say, Starbucks corporate, and use that voice to gain a collective bargaining agreement, but also to hold that company accountable. So I think the biggest thing, and this goes, right to the longshoremen, when you get those things, when you get those benefits, this also relates to Johnny's sort of gray area, right? A lot of these companies will try to say that a union is a third party. You know, it's actually it's a barrier between the worker and the corporate representatives, or the worker and the company. But the actuality is it's the only thing that allows the workers to hold that company accountable. Starbucks is really big on claiming the amazing benefits that they already offer their workers, which I can tell you as one of their workers is not actually as good as they say it is. But let's just say that it was. There's still nothing preventing Starbucks from pulling those benefits away. The only thing preventing Starbucks from coming in and taking those benefits from us once they've been offered is a collective bargaining agreement, is a contract. So it's really hard for me, this whole third party narrative, and they used it quite a bit in their anti-union campaign here in Buffalo when they were trying to stop this from happening to begin with, is, you know, we want to be able to have a conversation with each and every one of our partners. We don't want to have to go through a union representative. Well, first of all, that's completely unrealistic that you're ever going to have a conversation with every 400,000 of us. The better thing for us is to be able to have a union collectively made up of your workers that can have these conversations and then come to you, with maybe one rep or two reps, but representative of the 400,000 people standing behind us, and be able to say, this is what we need. This is what we need on the floors of these stores. Nobody knows what we need better to run these stores than the people actually running them. And when we sign that agreement with these benefits that you offer us, we want to make sure you can't come and take them away. I personally, in the 12 years I've been with the company, I know some of the benefits we had when I started in 2010, and I could make a nice little list of the ones that have already been just taken away from us unilaterally without any conversation. And so a union allows us to have that voice and to hold the company accountable.
And there are several things that are important and that I want to pull out there. And one of those is that, you said that it's a collective of workers coming together for, a better workplace, better working conditions and stuff like this. And that is a definition that's not dependent on the government. That's a definition that's not dependent on the boss recognizing that you're a union. If you come together, you say you're a union, then by golly, you're a union, right? And it doesn't matter what anybody else says. And that's an important thing to understand. And we should, I think we should. And I think most of us, we're all in unions that more or less agree with this. We should make use of the state power through the National Labor Relations Board and the National Labor Relations Act where we can and where it makes sense. But if all of that falls away tomorrow, and that's not the case, and we're in a landscape without legal protection for unions. Workers had those before those legal protections. Workers had unions when it was expressly illegal, right? And so it's important to understand that, whether or not you have a union election, if you're coming together with people on your job and advocating for yourselves, then that's the working definition of a union. That's the thing that's important there. Graham, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
Yes, I did. You kind of touched on it, but in our organizing at REI, a lot of people, hadn't either been in a union or didn't know what a union was. We have a lot of people who are either in college or recently graduated, or have been in those more like quote unquote professional white collar jobs, who are sort of in a second career, or this is their like fun retail job, who didn't really know what a union was. And so when explaining it to people, the one point that we as organizers try to make is that, no matter what union you're affiliated with, whether you affiliate at all, ultimately the union is us. We are the ones who are making the decisions. We are the ones who are deciding, when to use our power, how to use our power as workers. So yeah, that is just kind of the fine point that I wanted to put on that, is that, if you call yourself a union, you are a union because it is made up of you and however many coworkers you have. And the trick is just becoming organized and knowing how to wield the power of your collective voice.
Absolutely, absolutely. Johnny, was there anything that you wanted to pull out of that before we move on?
Yes, thank you. Everyone said it so perfectly, that you are the union. Once you start talking to your coworkers and you all decide that, hey, we need to come together to make changes in the workplace, that is the day that your union has started. And it doesn't need to be a large number. It could be 2 of you. As soon as you say, hey, let's do something about this, your union has been formed. And that's it. And so with everyone has talked about third partying the union. That is, well, I'm sure we'll get to this later, a big union busting tactic. Knowing that you are a union as soon as you start talking about making change, that deads that right there. So yeah, just to echo what everyone said, you are the union as soon as you start talking about it.
We will go to the next question, which is, why are unions good? Why are unions good? We know what a worker is. We know what a union is. We've talked a little bit about it, but why are they good? And I'm going to kick it back to Lee to answer this question, because I think that she'll have a good answer for us in general, but also she has a really good personal story that we've talked about on the show already. But yeah, so Lee, why are unions good? Why should one do a union?
I've been asked a lot by my family. So I'm based in New York City right now, but I grew up in rural South Texas. And a lot of my family, just by virtue of like the culture and historic attitudes towards unions, have been pretty anti-union. And when I went off to college and learned more, it was a decision that I made. But this is a conversation I have at home all the time with my aunts, uncles, cousins, of like, let me break it down of like what this union does for me. So the reason I think unions are a good thing, there's like the theory-ish stuff of like the thing I believe in my like soul and my values. And then there's like the practical stuff that happens. The thing I believe in my soul and my values, and is like, could be called like theory, is that like, I really believe that unions as an institution are this other thing besides like government, besides the institution of the family, besides the institution of education, that does good things and is able to take collective action around something that everybody has to do every day, which is work in order to live. And so what unions do is like bring together people and influence the way that society and politics happens, like who gets what, when, where, and how, and under what conditions. Like that's what a union does. And like, that is why I think that like in theory, they're a good thing. And in practice, they also just do the work that a lot of other institutions believe they do or say they do that don't in fact do them, or do them in ways that don't actually benefit workers. So like universities are a really strong example of this, because they often use the metaphor of a family, and they also use the metaphor of like they are just like places where you get an education. When one of the largest landowners in the borough of Manhattan is Columbia University and New York University. Like they are financial institutions. In addition, we have this running joke that New York University is a real estate company that also gives degrees. And it's like kind of a reality, because they've eaten up so much property and played a significant part in gentrification of New York City. And so what a union does is kind of bring that to the fore and say, you're not our family. You're not like this beneficial force that, actually you are a disciplinarian. Actually, what you do is withdraw benefits is retaliation. And that is what a union does, is pushes up against that and uses the power of the collective to fight back against it. Like in a really practical way, like one of the things that so visualizes what a union does and why it's good is this like kind of cartoon. And it's like kind of childish, but we've all seen the cartoon of like one big fish and then like a gazillion little fish. And the little fish around it can be eaten up by the big fish, but when they make the big fish together are bigger than the big fish. Like, I believe that cartoon in my soul. And it encapsulates like these like bigger ideas and practices that I've been talking about in a really concise way of like, together we're so much more.
Absolutely. If there's I don't know of a political cartoon that is more true in more ways than the Big Fish cartoon. That's definitely a really good one. And you know, just for the general thing of that's like mechanically how unions get the good things that they get. And so what are some of the things that y'all were able to win? How has the union been good for you personally?
Yeah. So the three biggest things that I think come up for me are wages, healthcare, and what would be called like social issues, or like what we call in UAWD bargaining for the common good, which is not just bargaining for yourself, but bargaining for everybody. And so in terms of wages, when the Graduate Student Organizing Committee started in 2015, their hourly wage was $15 an hour. And at the time, that was higher than the average minimum wage in New York City. But we at GSOC were the first private union to organize at a words are hard. First union to organize at a private university after a set of NLRB decisions. What that meant is that we knew that our wages set the floor. And so every contract after us, we are constantly pushing it up because, you know, NYU will like to say like, oh, it's just us here. Like, this is just our contract. But we know that Harvard is going to say, well, at NYU, they make this. Or Uptown at Columbia, they'll say at NYU, they make this. And so that's a really important bargaining chip. And so we've gone from $15 an hour in 2015 to $30 an hour by 2026. That's huge. In terms of healthcare, most of our unit is actually master's students. So they're paying like $60,000 a year to get a degree. And then they're required to have health insurance on top of that. A lot of people don't know that graduate students are not children. You know, they're full grown adults. Often they don't qualify for their parents' health insurance. And so when you're in our unit, you get a 95% reimbursement on the healthcare premium, which is around $3,500. Lastly, for bargaining for the common good, we made NYU be a sanctuary campus and agree that cops on campus pose a health and safety risk to everyone on campus, especially workers. And this was huge for us. It's saying that, you know, ICE can't come on campus, cops can't come on campus. Like, you're a private institution, you can make that decision and you have not. Well, we're not going to work for you until you do too. And that was a huge win in our last contract and something that I believe really deeply in.
Yeah, that's great news. Being able to protect your members and students on campus is very important. Johnny, did you want to add anything to that? What would you say? What would you say if somebody asked you why are unions good?
Unions are good for the reasons that Lee stated. And as well, we've been talking about this for a while now. Upper management, CEOs, shareholders, they have no clue what's going on in the day-to-day in the workplace. If you ask them to come in to work and to fill in, they would probably do a very bad job and probably make it worse. So in that sense, you need the workers, the people who are there with the day-to-day, doing all the hard work. They need to have a voice in the workplace and how it functions, what the company looks like, because we know more than anyone else. We know. So having a union and us being a part of that is giving us that voice to say, hey, this is not okay. You're doing this. This does not work for the workplace. It doesn't work for the customer. It doesn't work for this. We're on the front lines. And you have that backing, that power, that voice to make those changes and to get them to listen to you. Without that, They could take suggestions. Like my company, we are non-union. Flight attendants have a very unique job, and as you all have seen throughout the pandemic, that we face some interesting working conditions. We faced a lot of workplace violence. And if you've been flying lately, there have been long delays or cancellations that do affect you directly. And flight attendants were saying, hey, these conditions are not okay, or the passengers are not okay for us as well. But without the power of a union and a contract backing us, it's just a suggestion to make those changes to benefit everyone. And so that's what's really important about a union, having one, why we need one, and what it does. And so, yeah, our AFA has won some big improvements for the airline industry, like no knives on the airplanes. That was AFA, no phones, so people could listen and hear instructions. And so those things are important. And so without them fighting for us, we'd have never gotten stuff like that in the workplace.
Yes, and Jeb asked, sent us a text message, saw where some Delta pilots had pickets up yesterday. Are they union? And if so, do they support the attendance organizing? That's an interest. Are the Delta pilots associated with the ALPA?
Yes, Delta pilots are union. The only employees that are union at Delta are our pilots and our dispatch. We are 20% a union, which is unheard of. All the other airlines are like 80, 90%. And so our Delta pilots are definitely supporting our campaign for the first time. And we're also supporting their contract negotiations. And so this is what solidarity and unionizing, this is what this looks like in real time. Workers coming together, even from different departments, and saying, hey, we're going to support each other against this larger management entity that's both trying to work us to death. They used to pit the pilots and flight attendants against one another. Like, oh, you're going to take a piece of their pie if you unionize. And so now we started talking to each other and saying, hey, we're both on the same side here. There's enough pie for everyone. Our CEOs and shareholders are getting all of it. And we're getting the crumbs. Let's fight together and to make sure that we get our fair share. And now that we're doing that, we're usually on the picket lines with them. And so it's been great having that support and solidarity.
Absolutely. And so so now we're working through this. We know what a worker is, we know what a union is, we know why they're good. Okay. Let's say you've convinced me. I'm a listener. I'm convinced. This sounds dope as hell. I want to do one of these things. How do I do that? I'll kick it over to you, Graham. You've got some firsthand experience. How does one do a union?
Yes. So the first step in doing a union is first to form an organizing committee. So a group of trusted coworkers that you can rely on and you can trust to do a lot of the legwork. Also to keep it secret at the beginning, because the element of surprise is a source of power and was a huge source of power for us at REI. But yeah, the very first step is to find, my coworkers, I was actually approached by a coworker and they were like, hey, come to the park. I want to talk to you about something. And so from that, that sort of created our very first organizing committee meeting. And from that point on, we've stuck by each other throughout this whole experience, from having one-on-one conversations with our coworkers after that. Sorry, there's a cat. And getting authorization cards signed, having our election, going through the experience of union busting. So yeah, step one, find some trusted coworkers and meet with them often to sort of map your workplace and get the strategy, the groundwork down.
What about Michelle? Do you have anything that you'd add to that? Of course, how do you form a union? Right, we're answering this in 5 minutes. We're not going to be able. There are resources. The organizing campaigns take years, right? But we're distilling this, right? So Michelle, what would you add to that?
I'm going to echo everything that Graham said. First of all, the element of surprise is very important. Finding the coworkers you can trust initially to keep that a secret, but to also help garner additional support. That conversation I referenced in my intro, I got a text message from that coworker asking me if I wanted to get a cup of coffee after one of our shifts later that week, which I will let you know. I mean, we literally serve coffee all day. So it was an interesting text message. And I was like, yeah, sure. I mean, we'll probably have already had 16 cups by that point, but yeah, absolutely. But what she also did was, I was one of the last people in Buffalo that was reached out to in our market in terms of forming that organizing committee. And I don't fault her for any of that. At that point, I'd been with the company 11 years. And so that kind of tenure usually would breed a certain level of loyalty, or at least a perceived level of loyalty. And so there was some apprehension to talking to someone who'd been with the company that long. Like I would, the potential of me feeling the opposite and running to management was pretty high. And I'm grateful every day that she still chose to have that conversation. But that's the strategy that you need to employ when you're at those very beginning stages. You have to sort of map that out. Our organizing committee was not just store specific, even though we were filing for individual stores. There's 20 stores in the Buffalo market, 20 Starbucks locations. And I believe every single one of them had at least one representative on our organizing committee. So it was really important from the beginning for us to map out the city, knowing that the company would inevitably come at us and probably try to divide and conquer in terms of pitting one store against the other. So we were able to sort of have eyes and ears on the ground in every one of those locations. And that was very essential to, like I said, Elmwood happened to be the first location to win, but there were 19 other stores in our market standing behind that store to get us over that finish line. The next step, I think, is making sure that you're there to take care of each other, because in almost every case, the anti-union campaign is going to come at you, and it's going to come at you strong. And it's very scary and it's very intimidating. And a lot of this new labor movement is on the younger side. I'm not including myself in that. I'm actually probably on the older side of it. But a lot of my coworkers, 2 of the coworkers at the Elmwood location were high school seniors, and they're being brought into, one-on-ones or 2-on-1s or 3-on-1s with not only, upper management and corporate, but, the president of Starbucks North America, who's bringing in $4 million a year. That's an intimidating situation. So making sure that you're continually checking in on your coworkers after those instances, seeing what kind of support they need, showing them what you're able to give them, as one of their fellow workers, as the union that corporate is just not concerned about. They don't care about the mental health of what they're putting these young workers through. They don't care about the physical toll, that is having on them. And so making sure that your coworkers feel as supported as possible. And if there are coworkers who don't feel like they have the strength to use their voices in those anti-union meetings, I think back to some of those instances and watching coworkers be brought to tears because of just the stress of being put in that situation to begin with. Having the voice to speak, to stand up for them and say, this is wrong. What you're doing to this person is wrong. It shouldn't be happening. And, I'm going to stand with them, and I'll use my voice if they don't feel like they can use theirs. That was what allowed us to get that first store. And that's what's allowing all of these stores since then. I'm watching the solidarity of baristas across the country stand up for one another, and call corporate out on their absolutely awful behavior. And when one person stands up, it gives the next person the strength to stand up. And that's what's happening right now.
Let's explain for people, what is union busting? And I'll go to Johnny Lane to kick us off with that.
Yeah. Yes, because I feel like my company has perfected union busting in the 30 plus years they've been trying to keep out a union at Delta. Union busting is exactly what it sounds like. It's the company trying to come in and dissuade workers from forming a union, and that's by any means necessary. Some of us have discussed captive audience meetings where their management comes in. You could be there with food, drinks, whatever your other coworkers, and someone just starts talking about why it's bad to have a union, why it's scary. Some of the language that you may hear is no more open door policy. You won't be able to speak with management directly anymore. We're a family. Why would you want a third party to come in and disrupt the family atmosphere? One of my favorites that my company uses is preserving our culture, which is, being from the South, those types of terms are rooted in white supremacy. So when you hear things like that, it can get kind of scary and your radar should go up. But those are just a few things that you may see at the beginning for them to kind of put in your mind that, oh, maybe having a union is bad. Food is often something that they'll use, like, oh, we're a family, we're providing you with pizza or ice cream. So it could seem like it's very harmless, but a lot of these tactics are very insidious. And that's just some of the beginning of union busting that you may see when you start your campaign. Delta's known for some of their very public ads that have gotten around in recent years. One of the more famous ones is instead of paying $50 for dues, you could buy a $700 PlayStation. The dues that you would spend in a year would go to buying a PlayStation or Braves tickets. And so it was just incredibly insulting that they would think that even like $50 that people were saving up for things like that they could spend that instead. Somehow that would have a PlayStation or a Braves tickets would have more value than collective bargaining power in the workplace. But unfortunately, some people do fall for it.
Yeah, one of the things that they said is that, dues might be $500 a year or something, and that you could buy a PlayStation with that instead. And I think it was either the AFL-CIO or the AFA that tweeted, also you could construct a guillotine. And then they deleted that post because, I don't know, somebody got a little too scared. And that is a critique that I have of the social media policy of some unions. They're not radical enough. They do not lean into the edgelord stuff enough. I think more guillotine imagery. That's my take. But we've mentioned this earlier in the show, the captive audience meetings. And Michelle, you touched on that really, and it's really intimidating. What are some of the things that they'll tell you in these captive audience meetings that you're forced to go to, or you could potentially lose your job?
So the first thing I'm going to say is that the company will never refer to them as a captive audience meeting. They like to call them things like listening sessions, which is what Starbucks corporate like to call them. They'll also like to tell you that they're not mandatory. However, you're paid to attend. And so if you're an hourly worker working paycheck to paycheck, and the option is go to this 1 hour meeting, because in most cases, the stores are shut down for these meetings. And so you're told, hey, your shift for that day is canceled. We're shutting the store down because we're having these listening sessions. So you can come to this 1 hour listening session and be paid for your entire shift that you were scheduled for. But if you don't come to this 1 hour listening session, then you're not paid for that shift. So you can say they're not mandatory, but the reality of the situation is you're dealing with hourly workers who need this income. And so their only option is to attend that listening session or that captive audience meeting. Then they start off very innocuous. The company narrative here in Buffalo was that this was coincidental, that all of these management and corporate were in Buffalo at just mere days after the filing of the first few union petitions. They had heard that there were problems in our market. And they were here to address them and to fix them. And they didn't know why things were so bad here, but none of the problems happening at the Starbucks stores in Buffalo were happening anywhere else in the country. So something had just happened, something had gone wrong here in Buffalo. And they were here to address that and to fix it, because this wasn't the true Starbucks experience. We weren't getting the true Starbucks experience, and they wanted to fix that for us. So that's how those meetings start out. And they'll get through, 50 minutes of talking at you. And then the last 10 they'll reserve for, well, we also wanted to address this union campaign. And they'll slowly work that into the conversation about how they don't feel like it's necessary. It will destroy the partner-to-partner relationship that we've, spent 50 years cultivating in the company. And they're going to fix all of the issues, which, by the way, the NLRA, the National Labor Relations Act, says they can't do. When a union campaign starts, one of the things that has to be maintained is what is called laboratory conditions, which means they can't come into a shop that's trying to organize, and they can't make things better, and they can't make things worse. So coming in at the start of a union campaign and saying we're going to fix all of the problems is actually not legal. But they frame that as a way, but we're here to take care of everything so that we can just let this pesky union campaign go. You don't have to worry about it. And those meetings get more and more aggressive the closer you get to the vote, to the point where the last couple, I actually wasn't permitted to attend the last listening session for Elmwood, because at that point they were dividing the store up into, very vocal union supporters and not so vocal union supporters. And the meeting that I wanted to attend had some not so vocal union supporters. And when I showed up, they said, "Oh, you're not able to stay for this meeting." So they get more and more aggressive, and they basically say, "Hey, we don't want a union. We want everybody to vote," because not voting to them is the equivalent of a yes vote in a lot of cases. And we want you all to vote no. I mean, it's that blatant. It's not, it's not even thinly veiled at this point.
Right.
And it can get really scary and really intimidating. And you have to, sort of be prepared to stand up and speak for your coworkers and call them out on their incredible lies and misinformation. It was one of the scariest things I've ever done. Sitting there, their third party narrative is also very, very, very strong. To echo what Johnny said, they like to say, we're just giving you the facts, and if you want to get facts on the union, then you should you should contact one of your union reps. And that very first meeting, I raised my hand and I said, well, I'm one of the organizing members, and I would be happy to answer any questions anybody might have. And my heart was pounding out of my chest. I mean, there wasn't a single meeting I sat at where my Apple Watch didn't give me a high heart rate notification. And we need to take that into account when workers are trying to organize, the mental and physical toll that they're put through simply for trying to exercise what is their right under the law in this country.
And all of this by people that hold their paycheck in their hands, right? I mean, this is a really, really big deal for folks. And one of the things that they'll tell people at retail stores and at restaurants like Starbucks and like REI is they're going to close your store if you organize. Graham, how did you address that because I'm assuming that came up, or there were implications in your campaign in New York. How did y'all speak to that concern?
So we actually didn't hear anything about closing the store from corporate in New York. The Soho location, it's a flagship store. It's in the Puck building, so it's a very historic location. It's almost like one of the prize gems of REI's the national company. So there wasn't really anything about store closure. But I can definitely agree with Michelle about the experience of sitting through these captive audience meetings and, I think there was for some people, the fear of being vocal and you might not lose your store location, but people being scared of being fired for being vocal. But the more vocal you are, the more you are protected by the National Labor Relations Act. And that's something that we really, really tried to hit home during these captive audience meetings. And it actually resulted in there not there was not a single captive audience meeting that REI ran where there was not just belligerent pushback from, several members of staff. So yeah, we didn't really run into the store closure thing, but people were afraid of being fired for their beliefs, for wanting this right of organizing at work. And we made it very, very clear that this is safe. It is essential that we push back on management, and that the more vocal you are and the more you actually take ownership of this union, the more protected you are against any attack from management.
So in the last 10 minutes, we've talked about union busting, what the boss is going to do. There are a couple of anti-union talking points that you're going to hear in these captive audience meetings that you might hear from people that you know in your family. Like, why are you, I hear this about unions. Why are you doing this when I hear this? And so I'll go to Hayden for the first one because I think that she's in a really good spot to answer this question. And this is from a listener. Jack from New Jersey recently had a conversation with my very anti-union boss, who was telling a story about a potentially believable complaint about a public school teacher failing his son from an educational perspective, but drawing the absolute worst possible conclusions from the experience. While I strongly believe these situations would be less prevalent if public schools were adequately funded, teachers paid enough, etc., there is a reality of people being failed by the system. What are some thoughts on how a hopefully future parent could handle that kind of situation with solidarity, Hayden?
Okay, so let me make sure I'm understanding the complaint there. They believe that the student was failed to be properly educated by a union representative
by the teacher and his anti-union boss, who, it's a boss, so but his anti-union boss is saying that, this is an example of unions protecting, lazy teachers and they're standing in the way of progress and standing in the way of customer experience or the education for the students, right?
Well, first of all, let's go ahead and make it very clear. A union is not necessarily going to protect a poor worker. What a union does is it gives you wind garden rights. It says that you can't be brought in for discipline or fired without cause. Now, that means that you're going to have to go through the proper channels. Your boss just can't not like you, or a parent can't just complain and say, well, it's the teacher's fault that my child did nothing all year. What that does is it requires there's due process. So just like we have a system of checks and balances, or we should, even within the government, if there's channels that things go through that are fact checked, that are supposed to be done before a decision is made. The union works not just to protect that worker, but to also protect the students, the faculty, and the climate of the school. So we're not going to base something off one complaint. You would have a due process and a representative there to actually get the facts and give you a voice, to where it's not a situation of he said, she said, and it escalates into a huge disagreement. You have someone there that's representing the best, actually, in that case, for the student and the teacher, and that would be your union representative through your wind garden rights.
Right. And that's, almost exactly what we said a couple of weeks ago when we got a similar question. And Adam, who was a former public school teacher, former teachers union, ostensibly, professional association here in Alabama staffer. And Adam, was there anything that you wanted to make sure that we added to that? I know that you've been kind of quiet during the show. Was there anything you wanted to add to that question?
Yeah, absolutely. Since I was involved in representing workers who were tenured and put up for termination. And let me just say, if management's job is to be management, if there is a worker whose conduct is so awful and egregious, they deserve to be fired. And frankly, it should be awful, egregious conduct that gets you fired and takes away your livelihood. But if, that does happen, and if there's a worker, in this case, a tenured teacher, whose conduct is so bad, but yet they can't be terminated, that sounds like a problem with management. That sounds like management is lazy or incompetent or unable to follow due process, because there's not a union in this country and probably in the world that I'm aware of that enshrines the right to poor conduct in a contract, right? No union says we want our employees to be able to behave badly at work, to not show up on time, et cetera, et cetera. But it's management's job to be management and to follow due process, to discipline workers according to policy and contract. So, that's what I always told folks, when they brought those concerns to me about protecting a lazy or incompetent teacher. The only way they're protected is if their administrator is lazier and is more lazy and more incompetent than the teacher in question, right? Everybody is entitled to due process, or should be entitled to due process. You're talking about taking away someone's livelihood, their ability to feed their family. It's not a lot to ask that they'd be able to produce some documentation.
Exactly. This is a question that you're going to get, that people, especially in service work like Starbucks, they get this question all the time, which is, if you hate your job, why don't you just leave it? Why don't you just get another job, Michelle? Why don't you just get another job?
I mean, I think the first part of wrong information in there is that we hate our jobs, because we don't. Part of what Starbucks was really good at is creating this community and creating these environments in these stores that allow you to have these connections with your customers, with the community around you, and with your fellow coworkers within your store. They actually they cultivate that. They encourage you to create those. We actually have a term in the company called a customer connection. So we don't hate our jobs. I mean, before this organizing effort, I'd been with the company 11 years. If I'd hated the job, I wouldn't have been with the company for 11 years. We love our shops, and we love our customers, and we love the people we work with. And when you love something, you work to make it better. You don't seek to leave it or tear it down. We're simply asking for the opportunity to have a voice in those shops, to be able to, have a direct line to the people making the decisions, essentially, and allow us to have the opportunity to help with those decisions. Right now, we're at the mercy of whoever's sitting up in some tower in Seattle and passing these, procedures and protocols down to us and saying, well, now we need you to do this. But there's no conversation with those hourly workers to say, is this actually going to be what's best for the store, for the customer, for the workers? There's no conversation. And that became more and more evident in the middle of a global pandemic. When we were being asked to enact even safety precautions that just weren't sufficient. And there was no leadway whatsoever to be able to say, hey guys, this isn't working. There was no way to say this is what you're asking us to do. It's not feasible. It's not working. And so we don't hate our jobs at all. And I think there's also there's a mentality within the service industry in general. And I think you touched on it earlier, that these jobs are temporary, or they're unskilled. And so you should just be able to suck it up. If you are in this situation for a limited period of time, you're putting yourself through college, or you're, in high school, or this is temporary while you're in the middle of a career change, that you should it's acceptable to deal with a certain level of disrespect. And it's acceptable to not have safe working conditions, and it's acceptable to not have fair wages. And for one thing, that's just absolutely not the case. I don't care if you're doing this job for 3 months or if you're doing this job for 12 years. Those are things that should be ensured to every worker. Certainly when the umbrella of that job is a multi-billion-dollar corporation who can do so much and more for their workers, and would just choose to keep the shareholders happy, as opposed to ensuring that their employees, who bring in those billions of dollars of profit, are taken care of.
Folks are going to start dropping off here in about 15, 20 minutes, and Lee had a question that she wanted to get to, and I went ahead, just to keep the frames so I don't have to do so much, I went ahead and brought Joe in, Joe from Labor Notes. He's going to be talking to us about stewards a little bit later. Is that fine, Joe, that you're going to be audience member for a little bit? Fantastic. So Lee, you had a question that you wanted to answer, which is something that you said that you've got a cousin who asks you this, and this is another thing that we talked about with Adam, because he gets a similar complaint as a stagehand. And the question was, I like unions in theory, but they're inefficient in practice. Why does it take 6 guys to do the work that one person could do? And so we're talking here about like job descriptions. Like unions are going to have job descriptions. You have to do, you're not. It is kind of frowned upon to do work for free in a union environment. Call me crazy, but so Lee, talk to us about that question that you got from your cousin and how you try to respond to him.
Yeah, like I said, I'm from Texas, and even though I'm from a part of Texas that's really historically involved in farm labor, there was like a lot of migrant laborers, and United Farm Workers was really big in South Texas where I grew up. At the same time, like the political conditions in South Texas have shifted such that a lot of folks who are Mexican American have a really specific political agenda. So like a lot of my family is really anti-union as working class people, as electricians, as farmers, and ranchers. And so for my cousin, like we were literally at Thanksgiving, and he's like, I'm a lineman. When the electricity goes out, like we can't wait for one more person to, go up the ladder and open the box and whatever it is. And I think the way that this is not a question I have a fantastic answer to, but what's important about it is like learning together with someone. Like I don't have all the answers, and it would be ridiculous to think that any one organizer does. So that's what I told him. It was like, that's a really good question. And I don't know what your working conditions are like. Like you've known me longer than I've known me. And you know that I'm a nerd, that I read and write for my job. I'm an educator. I don't know what it's like to have to restore electricity after a hurricane. But at the same time, like this feels like something that I've been told in my workplace, which is that like there's a parcelization or segmentation of labor. And like that just doesn't, what it actually means in practice is like, it's not about many different people having one small job, even though that acknowledges that work is a collective effort that takes many people. That parcelization means that job, which is incredibly dangerous, probably needs some safeguards. So I think about like I said, I haven't fully thought this through, so I don't have a catchy line phrase, but like one of the things that I've heard in listening into like the conversation around pilots need more rest between flights because they're doing this really crazy, responsible, heavy job. I don't know what it's like to be an electrician or a lineman, but something tells me that if you're up in the air being fatigued, being having to work really long hours under stressful conditions, having more people rather than less people, it isn't actually about what you as a person can and can't do or more or less equipped to do, but keeping everybody safe. And so that's what my gut said. That's what my intuition said. But oftentimes when you think about like, it takes, it's always somebody else's job, or it takes a bunch of people to do the work. It's like, actually, that's probably because for the first time you're working in a safe workplace and everybody there is as rested as they need it and has the ability to like combat fatigue or combat like the challenges that they otherwise face on the job.
Right. Does anybody else have, and Adam, I'll throw it to you if none of the other three have anything else to say, because I know.
I think Graham had some context from the REI position.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is actually so relevant to what's going on at REI right now in our contract negotiations, because we have a lot of different departments that deal with like extremely oversized or heavy equipment, like kayaks, canoes, bikes. I myself work in the bike shop department. So my job is like actually pretty dangerous. So just having like a specific example that's relevant to just kind of having multiple people to help with one job. We have to hang bikes on the ceiling in our action sports department. So basically where we sell all of the skis, the bikes, all the stuff that you need to like get outdoors and have a fun time. So we hang bikes on the ceiling, and there is a complete lack of training. Typically, there are only 2 people who actually do this job. So something that we're asking for in our contract is specific training on how to safely put a bike onto the ceiling and have a minimum number of people involved in that task. So just to kind of like, I guess, answer this question, like there is the concern about safety. So of course, having more people involved in a task makes it so that, for example, with the bike, one person is hanging the bike, one person is spotting, and another person is like directing the flow of customers. And then also having the specific training around that task. You know, one person is trained to hang, one person is trained to spot, and one person is trained to direct the flow of traffic. So that everybody is utilizing their own expertise to its fullest potential. So just kind of a cool, relevant example from REI.
And I think the most important thing, you know, there's a lot of things that we could mention and that we could add. And I started off saying that it's kind of frowned upon to do work for free. And that's what you're doing if you do work outside of your job description, right? Is you are doing work for free for the company. And there's no reason to do that because they would not do the same thing for you. But the most important thing is what Graham mentioned, is that they are putting this in their contract. They are talking about this language. They are talking through this. Who is they? The workers there. So if there is genuinely, if there is genuinely just an absurd work rule, guess who can change that? You can, as the worker who bargains your next contract. You can get on the negotiating committee. You can be on the bargaining committee. Run on eliminating this dumb work rule and get on the bargaining committee. Because there's, right, I'm sure there's 300 million people in the United States. There are 100 million plus workers. I'm sure, you know, probably not a whole lot, probably less than people think, but I'm sure there's some that are silly. Well, get rid of it. If it's your contract, if it's your workplace, you get rid of it. That's up to you.
Yeah, that was the one point I was just going to throw in there, is that, you know, who's making the decision? When I'm hanging up lights for a concert and we're supposed to do two people per light, if I choose myself to just do it by myself, you know, that's on me. That's my choice. Maybe they are lighter than normal and I can handle that. But that's different than when, you know, if someone in management were to come to us and say, hey, actually, forget about the 2 people per light rule. You're all just going to do it by yourself. You know, that's different. And I think whenever it comes to worker safety versus profitability or, you know, perceived efficiency or saving time, any of that, we should always err on the side of worker safety. And I don't think unions should ever apologize for that.
Yeah,
I can add a little bit too, if that's okay. A lot of it's going to piggyback on what Graham said and a little bit on what Adam said, but some of the things we're talking about in our proposals for the first Starbucks contract is a minimum staffing requirement, which really doesn't necessarily exist. Maybe in theory it exists, but if you're, you know, in the middle of a shift and you have 2 people call off, there's nothing right now that protects us in terms of where does that workload then get dispersed. It gets dispersed to the 5 people who are on that shift. And what happens to the profits that are coming in, because the company's now not paying 2 employees, but the same amount of profits in theory are coming in. So where is that going? That's going right back to the company. So one of the things, aside from a minimum staffing requirement, would be the ability to, if we're short-staffed, to shut down some channels. I don't know, I'm certain most people are not super familiar with how a Starbucks is run, but there's multiple channels for customers. There's there's the in-house channel. In a lot of cases, there's a drive-through channel. Now there's a mobile order and pay channel. In a lot of cases, there's a delivery channel. All of those require people to run them. And you have a couple people call off and you're still expected to run all of those channels. So we want a couple of things: the ability to be able to shut down certain channels if we're short-staffed, to try to make sure that we're not doubling the workload of the people who were able to be there. And secondly, is compensation for working short-staffed. It's inevitable that our workload is going to, at minimum, probably double if people are unable to be there. And that shouldn't be automatic additional profit for the company. That should somehow be dispersed so that there's that compensation for working harder than you would normally be working is sent back to those people who are working that shift. We're not saying shut the shop down, which is, of course, their narrative. We're not saying if somebody is sick that all of a sudden the entire business has to come to a screeching halt. We're just saying, let's figure out a way together to manage that so that we're not being overworked and the customers are not suffering, and it's crazy the way that these companies look at what we're saying is the most fair and equitable way to handle a situation. And they're going, well, you just don't want us to make any money. You just want to shut everything down. No, absolutely nobody said that. Who wins if we shut the business down? We certainly don't win. So those are some of the proposals we are working on and hopefully asking for, and we'll get in that first collective bargaining agreement.
Fantastic. And so then let's spend the last few minutes on this, Adam's question about how do you deal, because look, right, we're worker advocates. We want the best work. Workers deserve more, right? This is kind of our shtick. But workers are people, and sometimes people are crazy. Like, they are weird. Sometimes people can be weird, right? Sometimes they can stir up stuff that really make you that can really cause issues in a campaign. A toxic coworker who is drama all the time, keeps petty interpersonal stuff stirred up, a snitch. What about when the toxic person is a steward or a building rep or an officer or somebody on the organizing committee? How do we deal with conflict between workers, between union members? And Johnny, you've been quiet for a little bit, so I'll throw it to you for a first.
Thank you. I feel like it could definitely speak to this, because in our ongoing union campaign, we have a very, very vocal anti-union faction within our company. And dealing with them has been just an exercise in patience and understanding, because you don't want to alienate your coworkers. These are people that I still have to work with. Some of them I've even called my friends at some point. And so, always trying to, in the back of my mind, I always say I'm trying to remember that, I work with them, I respect them, or even, I may love some of my friends. And that once we move past this, we'll still have to work together. So that's like my broad answer. But directly, and I'm just going to be honest with you, sometimes you're just going to have to let some people go and move on. You might not be able to convince people that they need a union, or their views just may be so opposed or bizarre that you're like, this is not going anywhere. I've had to let some conversations go. They've gone into QAnon, conspiracy theory territory. And I'm just like, you know what? No, I am out of my depth a little bit, or I just strongly disagree. And I don't have the mental or emotional bandwidth to carry this conversation on. And you know what? That's okay. And I think you do yourself better service as an organizer when you say, this conversation isn't going to work. I may not be able to save this person. I can save the next person. And then another tactic that I use, and that we use, every organizer has a Slack or Discord or something like that, WhatsApp. I suggest someone else talk to them. Someone at the company speaks their language. And in a work group that has over 20 something thousand flight attendants in it, we're not all going to be the same. I'm very fortunate that I have a friend circle that somewhat believes the similar things that I do, but not all of my coworkers do. So in that case, I'm going to say, hey, you know what? You seem to be on the same wavelength as this person. Maybe you should try to talk to them. Maybe you can speak their language and see if you all can come to some type of meeting ground or terms, or just, progress them from wherever they are in whatever organizing conversation that you're having. But we have our snitches. We have people who are looking at our Facebook accounts to see what we said in 2015 and who are reporting us to the company. And I just have to think that, I'm trying to save them from themselves, I know it's a hero thing or whatever, and that may not be the best way to come at it. But if they're doing that, that means that there's something going on with them personally in their lives. It's not my job to dig it out or, find out what it is. I just have to let them do that and continue on with my organizing and forming a union, because that is the goal. And we're just going to save them from whatever negativity and nonsense that they're doing, and not let it derail the campaign. But you know what? You can't take on every single person. You just can't. It's impossible.
Exactly. Yeah. Does anybody else have anything they want to add to that?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about, so far we've been talking about what it means to speak to people who are like at the level of yes union, no union, or like I'm not in a union, I am in a union. One thing that's come up over the past few years, and especially as I've become more involved not just in my unit's politics, but in UAW national and regional politics, is also interpersonal conflict and interpersonal forms of harm that happen amongst union members, and how you manage that in maintaining your professional relationship that you have with these like colleagues and like union colleagues, like not even just work colleagues, but union colleagues, and confronting it and addressing it while also maintaining that relationship. Specifically, I think what comes to mind for me is sexism and racism as they are present. If they're present in society, that means they're present in unions. So within the UAW, like just a month ago at our conference at the UAW Constitutional Convention, I was mistaken for a different person who's of a different ethnic background, but who is also like an outspoken woman of color. And this has happened even before the conference, after the conference, like we just get mixed up all the time. And even though this is a microaggression, it's actually been a useful teaching experience to talk to my UAW brothers and sisters, which is like a language that's really common in the UAW, and talk about these subtle things that like, it's actually really important that you don't mix me up with my friend. I love her. I'm honored to be mistaken for her. She's beautiful. But what I also hear when you say that is that you're not paying attention to like each of our individuality, or like, something else that came up is realizing that some of the auto workers who are men would go around and shake the hands of everybody there, and then would assume that the women present were partners or wives, and not in the UAW themselves, or like just not like literally not even speak to them, right? And as the UAW grows, as it moves into other sectors, and also as capitalism changes, as it has historically and it will continue to do, like women and non-binary people have a role in the labor movement, and you just like can never make an assumption about why someone is there. And so those have been difficult conversations. There's also like conversations about reform and what the role of a union is. Like, is it a service union? Is it a business union? This is like Union 201. So we could get into that at another level at another time. But to have that conversation about like conflict within a union, and like you might disagree with someone about this political strategy, but you can't use interpersonal harm as a way to address that. So like another instance came up where someone was, offering a case, in favor of like business unionism, and the caucus that I was a part of, which is more rank and file unionism, was using language that just like came down to ad hominem attacks that also aligned with like historical misogynoir, right? And that's just wrong. And it's like not okay. And so finding ways to say, we're going to keep this at the level of political strategy and political difference, and not let the things that plague our society also plague like the way that we manage conflict in our union. Like that it feels important to say, because harm happens, like conflict is going to happen. It's how we choose to approach it and resolve it.
Exactly. Yeah. It's important to, it's important to recognize that, yeah, people are going to have differences, and there is a correct, like there's a proper way to have disagreements, political disagreements that doesn't resort to those types of things. So, folks, I appreciate your time. You've all been very generous, and we're going to be letting you go on a crazy screen, looks like. But I really appreciate everybody's time. These are, like I said, these are always my favorite shows to do, and it was an honor to be able to get all of y'all here. So thank you so much. Michelle Eisen had to go early. We've still got Graham Gale from REI, RWDSU Johnny from the Delta AFA, Lee from the UAW 2110. Folks, thank you so much. Appreciate it. You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.